I was sorting through the last of my father's things when the doorbell rang. One of those slow, hesitant rings that sounds like the person on the other side isn't sure they should be there. I opened the door and found a small, elderly man leaning on a cane. His coat was too large for his thin frame, and the winter wind pushed at him as if it wanted him gone. But his eyes, sharp, unsettled, fixed on mine. "Are you Margaret Ellison?" he asked. I nodded, wary. He took a trembling breath. "I was your father's business partner. Long ago. Before everything went wrong." My heart skipped, and for a moment, the hallway tilted. My father had passed only 3 months earlier. His business life, particularly the dismantling of it, had been a silent ache in our home for decades. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small brass key on a faded red ribbon. He placed it in my palm with surprising firmness. "He would have wanted you to have this," he whispered. "He kept everything." I didn't know until it was too late. Before I could ask a single question, he turned and retreated down the walkway, hunched against the wind. I called out, but he didn't stop. Inside, with the door closed, the house felt heavier. I held the key up to the light. It wasn't a house key, nor a car key. It was older, engraved with a number. The metal was cold enough to sting. I didn't know why, but I felt it in my bones. Whatever this key opened was something my father had wanted hidden until the very end. The next morning, I drove to the storage unit listed on the back of the key tag. A place I'd never heard him mention. The clerk nodded after checking the system. "That unit's been paid up for 41 years, he said. "Autodrafted by someone named Ellison. Guess that was your dad." My father, who had lived frugally, even modestly, for most of my adult life, had spent 4 decades paying for a storage unit he never mentioned. I walked through the metal corridor until I found the number. The key slid in perfectly. The lock released with a soft click, like it had been waiting. Inside the dim space was only one object, a 6-foot steel safe bolted to the concrete floor. My breath caught. The safe had the same number engraved as the key. The moment the key turned, something inside me tightened, anticipation mixed with dread. The heavy door swung open, and I reached into the darkness. My fingers brushed paper. Dozens of folders. Bound documents. Stamped certificates. When I pulled the first one into the light, my heart pounded against my ribs. It was a share certificate for Ellison Marwood Engineering, the company my father had co-founded, signed by both partners nearly 50 years earlier. Certificate after certificate. Original ledgers. Contracts. Proofs of ownership. They were all here. And that's when I understood. For my entire adult life, I had believed the company was taken from my father. That he walked away empty-handed. But the documents in my hand suggested something different. Something impossible. Something dangerous. And something that someone, perhaps more than one someone, had wanted buried. I looked at the stacks of original shares, untouched since the day they were signed. My father had never lost his ownership. Someone had stolen it. And now I held the evidence. But the moment I turned, safe door still open, I saw movement reflected in the polished steel. Someone standing at the end of the corridor. Watching me. My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am 64 years old. I say that with a certain steadiness now, but for much of my life, age felt like a quietly advancing tide, creeping up behind me while I remained too busy caring for everyone else. My career, modest but satisfying, was in school administration. I never married, though I once came close. The relationship ended when I was 39, and by the time heartbreak softened into acceptance, life had already rearranged itself around solitude. But the constant through all of it, the one gravity that pulled at every decision I made, was my father. He was a proud man, brilliant even, but he carried a wound he refused to name. It lived in the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one watched. In the pauses when he nearly said something before swallowing the words. In the way he clung to his workshop in the garage as if sawdust could hold broken things together. Growing up, I knew he had once owned half of a thriving engineering firm. A modest empire, He'd called it when I was 6. But by the time I was 10, the company belonged entirely to his former partner, Douglas Marwood. My father never spoke of the deal. Every time I asked, thinking I could somehow fix what haunted him, he gently but firmly changed the subject. "It's better buried, Maggie," he'd say. "Some things don't need digging up." Maybe that's why I never pursued a more glamorous life. Stability felt like a tribute to him. Safety a kind of shield. I became a quiet woman with a quiet life. Routine, orderly days, the sound of students' chatter, and the evenings spent reading or tending plants. So when he died, and the silence of my house pressed down on me, I grieved not only for him but for all the truths that had died with him. Or so I believed. That key changed everything. The man who had delivered it, whose name I never caught, had disappeared by the time I stepped outside to look for him. The street was empty. My neighbors hadn't seen anyone. And something about his visit gnawed at me. Was he afraid? Was he guilty? Or was he warning me? Back at the storage facility, after seeing the figure at the corridor's end, I stepped forward slowly. But the person, whoever they were, turned and vanished before I could make out a face. By the time I finished locking the safe again, my pulse still hammering, I knew 2 things for certain. First, my father had not walked away willingly from his company. Second, someone else had just learned that I now possessed the documents he'd hidden for 41 years. That night, I spread the share certificates across my dining table. I read every number, every signature. The ownership distribution was unmistakable. Half the company, still in my father's name, had been neither dissolved nor legally transferred. Whatever deal he made before I turned 10, it had not been real. And someone had spent decades ensuring no one would ever know. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. Not fear, not yet, but something sharper. Resolve. Because I had lived my whole life believing my father walked away from the company he built. But now I was beginning to realize the truth. Someone had stolen his legacy. Someone had lied. And that someone had a great deal to lose if I chose to expose it. My father's side of the family had dwindled long before I reached adulthood. He was an only child, and my grandparents passed within a year of each other. My mother left when I was 14, not cruelly, not dramatically, but quietly. One day she simply said she needed a life that felt like breathing, and ours felt like holding oxygen underwater. We never heard from her again. So it had been just the 2 of us. My father poured every ounce of his affection into raising me. And I, in turn, built my life around being the steady ground beneath him. Yet our home was not without tension. His silence about the past created an atmosphere of carefulness, as if certain questions were landmines. My cousin, Lydia, was the only relative who stayed consistently in our lives. She was a woman who carried ambition like perfume, strong, unmistakable. She married well, lived well, and thrived in social circles that would have left me breathless. Despite our differences, she treated me with a kind of condescending fondness. But Lydia's husband, Richard, was another matter. He was in finance, successful, polished, and always unusually curious about my father's early career. I dismissed it for years as business fascination. Only now, with the documents spread before me, did his persistent questions take on a more calculative shade. The night after I found the safe, I invited Lydia over. I needed grounding, or perhaps confirmation that I wasn't imagining the enormity of what I'd uncovered. She arrived with a bottle of wine and the breezy confidence she always carried. But the moment she saw the papers, the lightness faded. "Margaret, this can't be real," she whispered, lifting a share certificate with delicate fingers. "It's all real," I said softly. She swallowed. "Then why didn't your father ever say anything?" "I don't know." Her gaze drifted, thoughtful, then troubled. "You realize what this means, don't you? The Marwood family has controlled that company for decades. If this came to light..." "I'm aware." Lydia set the paper down carefully. "Whatever you do, be cautious. People don't give up power gracefully." A strange heaviness filled the room. She was warning me. But there was something else behind her eyes, something unspoken, almost conflicted. Later, when she left, I noticed her hesitate at the door. "Please, just don't do anything alone," she said. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the documents, but because of a message that arrived at 2:13 a.m. Unknown number, stop digging. Let the past die with him. I stared at the screen, heart racing. Someone knew exactly what I had found. Someone who didn't want it exposed. Someone who was willing to threaten me to keep it quiet. And the worst part wasn't the message. It was the knowledge that only one person besides me had seen the documents. Lydia. But before I could convince myself of anything, my phone buzzed again. Another message. "You're not the only one who knows what you found." The threat wasn't vague anymore. It was personal. And I had no idea yet just how close the betrayal truly was. I didn't want to believe it at first. I told myself the messages could have come from anyone. A random number. A coincidence. Someone who somehow knew my father's past better than I did. But the next morning, everything became unmistakably clear. I logged into my banking account, intending to wire a small payment to renew my homeowner's insurance. The kind of mundane errand that keeps life stitched together. What I saw instead made my breath stop. My savings account, nearly $90,000, was drained. Not transferred. Not spent. Moved internally into a new investment account I had never opened. One with Richard's brokerage firm's name stamped across the header. My hands shook as I clicked through the details. I was listed as the primary account holder. The signature on the authorization form was a clumsy imitation of my own, enough to satisfy an automated check but insulting to my eyes. Someone had forged my approval. Someone had moved my life savings into a high-risk fund that I never would have touched. Someone close. The phone rang before I even formed the thought. "Lydia." I answered on the second ring. "Margaret," she began, breathless. "Something's wrong. Richard hasn't come home. He left last night right after I returned from your place. He said he had something urgent to handle, and that was it." A coldness slid down my spine. "Lydia, did you tell him about the documents?" She hesitated. A long, painful silence. "I mentioned that you had inherited something significant from your father," she said finally. "I didn't know what it was. I didn't tell him specifics. I swear." My mind raced. The forged account. The threatening messages. The figure watching me in the storage facility. "It wasn't your fault," I said quietly, though a part of me wasn't sure. But betrayal has a way of creeping in quietly, like water slipping through cracks before you realize the foundation is already eroding. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone with the bank's fraud department. The representative was polite but firm. "Technically, Ms. Ellison, the transfer originated from your authenticated login," she explained. "Our system shows no sign of external compromise." My signature was forged. "We can escalate a claim, but it may take 60 days. 60 days. My savings, everything I'd used to support myself through retirement, gone into the hands of someone who had both motive and access. By noon, exhaustion settled into my bones. Not because of the money, though that loss hit like a physical blow, but because it confirmed something I had tried desperately to deny. Someone wasn't just trying to scare me. They were dismantling my life, piece by piece, to stop me from pursuing the truth my father had protected. That afternoon, I drove to the old Marwood estate. Not to confront anyone yet. I wasn't ready. But I needed to see the place where my father's life had split in two, before and after the betrayal that had shaped everything. The estate hadn't changed. Still grand. Still immaculate. Still belonging to a family whose wealth had deepened over generations. As I sat in my car across the street, watching the tall iron gate, I saw a figure emerge from the house. Douglas Marwood's son, Jonathan. Nearly my age. Polished. Controlled. A man who'd grown accustomed to inheriting advantages. He walked to a waiting car, phone pressed to his ear. Just before he stepped inside, he turned, almost as if sensing he was being observed. His eyes scanned the street until they landed on my car. Recognition flared. Not of me, but of something else. Something he feared I might know. And the moment our eyes met, I knew. He was involved. Whether in the theft, the fraud, or the messages, I didn't yet understand. But the Marwoods had regained a company they never should have owned. And now they stood to lose everything. As Jonathan's car pulled away, I made a silent promise. I would not be scared into silence. I would not be bought off. And I would not let betrayal win again. Not this time. What I didn't know then was that uncovering the truth would cost me far more than money. It would cost me trust, safety, and illusions I had carried for decades. Because the betrayal wasn't only decades old. It was happening now. And from someone far closer than I imagined. The next morning, I sat in my father's old workshop, surrounded by the documents I had carried home from the safe. The smell of cedar and machine oil, his scent, clung to every board of the room. I let it steady me. I needed clarity, direction, a plan rooted in reason, not fear. So I did what my father would have done. I began documenting everything. I took photographs of each share certificate, scanned every contract, created a digital archive with timestamps. I labeled folders meticulously, just as he had taught me when I was 12 and helping him organize receipts for tax season. But this was more than record-keeping. It was reclaiming his voice. At noon, I met with an attorney recommended by a retired colleague, a woman named Evelyn Shaw, in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and sharper-minded. Her office overlooked the courthouse, and files covered every surface in neat, towering stacks. I explained everything from the moment the key arrived. She listened without interruption, taking notes in tight, elegant handwriting. When I finished, she tapped her pen lightly against the legal pad. "What you have," she said, "is the kind of evidence that topples empires." I swallowed. "So the shares are valid?" "More than valid. They prove your father never relinquished ownership. If the Marwoods took control without his consent, or through coercion, forgery, or undeclared transactions, that's corporate fraud. Possibly criminal." The room felt smaller suddenly. "Are you in danger?" she asked. The question startled me. "Yes," I said softly. "I think so." She leaned forward. "Then we proceed carefully. First, everything gets duplicated and stored off-site. Multiple places. Second, do not confront anyone yet. Third, you tell no one else you're pursuing this, not even people you trust." My mind flicked to Lydia, to the hesitation in her voice, to her missing husband. "I understand," I said. Evelyn studied me a moment. "Your father hid these documents because he knew their value, and the danger. He must have believed the truth would matter someday." Her words struck a deep place inside me. The truth had mattered to him. He just hadn't lived long enough to reclaim it. When I returned home, I found my mailbox open, physically forced open, and inside was an unmarked envelope. My heart thudded painfully as I slid a finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper. A photograph. Me, taken from behind, standing in the storage unit corridor the moment I opened the safe. I felt the blood drain from my face. Someone was following me, watching me, cataloging my movements. On the back of the photograph was a short message, typed in bold. "Those documents do not belong to you. Walk away, or you'll lose more than money." A threat, direct and unmistakable. My first instinct was panic. But then something inside me shifted, something old, something inherited from my father's quiet resilience. Fear sharpened into focus. I turned the photograph over again, studying the angle. It had been taken from the far end of the corridor. The figure I had seen that day hadn't been a coincidence. They were recording me. And if they knew about the documents, they might also know about the lawyer. I spent the rest of the day building a timeline, cross-checking corporate filings with the dates on the original certificates. Discrepancies appeared in almost every year. The Marwoods had amended ownership records without supporting documentation. They had issued new shares to themselves, diluting my father's stake, illegally. Log after log showed a pattern. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decades-long cover-up. By midnight, surrounded by papers and illuminated by the dim glow of my desk lamp, I discovered one final piece that made everything snap into place. A ledger entry showing a payout, 45 years ago, to a name I recognized. Not a Marwood. Not an employee. A person I had seen just yesterday, standing at Marwood's gate. Jonathan. He had been receiving money, quietly, regularly, from the company for decades. Money tied to irregular entries. Money tied to forged signatures. Money tied to the disappearance of my father's ownership. I stared at the name until my vision blurred. Jonathan hadn't just inherited his father's wrongdoing. He had continued it. My breath caught as headlights swept across my living room wall. A car had pulled up outside my house. Slowly. Deliberately. And it wasn't leaving. I turned off the lamp, letting darkness settle over the room. My pulse thudded in my ears as I moved quietly toward the window. I parted the curtains by an inch. A black sedan sat idling across the street, engine humming softly. The windows were tinted, the interior hidden. No one stepped out. No one approached my door. They wanted me to know they were there. A warning. A stalker's patience. A predator's first circle. I stood still, breathing through the rising surge of panic. At 64, fear feels different. Not as sharp, but deeper, reaching into places where safety used to live. But I'd lived quietly my entire life. Too quietly. I had allowed silence to sculpt me, shape me, cage me. This time I would not shrink. I drew the curtains closed. If they expected me to back down, they didn't know the woman my father raised. I spent the next morning gathering every document and duplicate into organized packets. I created 3 physical sets and stored one at Evelyn's office, one in a bank deposit box, and one in a locked suitcase beside my bed. Then, I took a step that changed everything. I contacted a forensic accountant. His name was Caleb Warren, early 40s, unassuming but with the calm, razor-precise questions of a man who had seen too many financial crimes to be rattled by them. He took one look at the documents and said, "Someone went to a great deal of trouble to hide this. Can you uncover everything?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "It'll take time. But yes." Next, I contacted law enforcement, not with accusations, but with a preventive measure. I reported the fraudulent bank activity, the threats, the mailbox tampering. I made a record. A time-stamped foundation for the storm I knew was coming. I felt my fear recede a little. Not gone, but harnessed. Then I made my boldest move yet. I confronted Lydia. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. She arrived looking exhausted, her eyes ringed with dark circles. "Richard is still missing," she whispered. "And someone broke into our home office last night." My breath stilled. What were they looking for? I don't know. But they destroyed his files. All of them. Her voice trembled. "Margaret. I think he was involved in something he didn't understand. Or maybe he did understand, and he just didn't tell me." I studied her, really studied her. The fear in her eyes wasn't feigned. "Did he ever mention the Marwoods?" I asked. Her gaze flicked up sharply. "More than once. He said the company was mismanaged in its early years and that there were discrepancies in their old ownership filings. He told me it wasn't our concern. Except now it is," I murmured. She reached across the table, gripping my hand. "Please. Whatever you're doing, stop. For your safety." For a moment, I softened. She was family, even in her flaws. But then I remembered the photograph. The forged transfer. The car outside my house. I can't stop, I said gently. Not anymore. Her face folded into something like grief. Then promise me you won't do it alone. I nodded, though in truth, I wasn't sure what the days ahead would require. That night, as I reviewed the documents again, my phone rang. It was Evelyn. Margaret, she said, her voice steady but urgent. You need to come to my office tomorrow morning. I've found something. What? A document that changes everything. And it ties directly to the Marwood family. My heart tightened. What does it mean? It means, she said quietly, your father wasn't the only one they deceived. A chill ran through me. And it means you're not the only one in danger. Before I could reply, I heard a sharp noise outside, metal scraping against metal. I stepped to the window. Someone was tampering with my lock. I didn't confront them. That would have been reckless. Instead, I did what my father always taught me at the moments when life felt like a narrowing hallway. Breathe, step back, find the vantage point. I called the police calmly, reported an attempted break-in, and quietly moved into a hotel under a different name. From that safer distance, the pieces finally snapped together. The next morning, at Evelyn's office, she slid a document across her desk toward me. It was a notarized transfer agreement. Unsigned. Your father never signed this, she said. Legally, it means the company remained co-owned until the day he died. She pointed to the signature line intended for the other partner. And there it was. A signature. Douglas Marwood. The date was 50 years old. But forensic review showed the ink was 2 years old. A forgery. A recent one. Douglas has been dead for 15 years, I said. Exactly. The silent downfall began the moment we submitted everything, quietly, to the state's corporate fraud division, to the SEC, and to a federal investigator Evelyn trusted. No confrontation. No theatrics. Just the clean blade of truth placed in the right hands. Within days, the Marwood Company accounts were frozen. Their board was notified of an active inquiry. The media hadn't caught wind yet, but pressure was mounting. Then the expected happened. Jonathan requested a meeting. He arrived at Evelyn's office looking thinner, paler, and older than the polished man I once saw through a car window. He asked to speak privately. I refused. He sat across from me with a practiced expression of regret. Margaret, he began, there's been a misunderstanding. There has, I agreed. A 40-year-long one. His jaw tightened. Your father abandoned those shares. Everyone knew that. Not according to the documents he preserved. His eyes flicked to Evelyn. You're making a mistake. This could ruin lives. It already ruined one, I said softly. My father carried that loss to his grave. A crack appeared in Jonathan's composure. He should have told you the truth. He did, I said. He kept the truth in a safe for 41 years. Jonathan exhaled sharply. Fine. You want compensation? A settlement? We can offer. I leaned forward. What did you do to Richard? His face froze. Evelyn interjected quietly. He's being investigated for financial misconduct connected to your family's accounts. Jonathan stood abruptly. This is spiraling beyond anything reasonable. You don't understand what you're unleashing. I met his eyes calmly. I'm not unleashing anything. I'm revealing what already existed. That calmness broke him more than anger ever could. He looked down. Defeated. As he left, he said something so quietly I almost missed it. My father made sure yours would never speak. The room chilled. But Evelyn's voice steadied me. His downfall has already begun, she said. In the following weeks. Their corporate assets were seized. The board removed Jonathan. The fraudulent signatures were exposed. Decades of financial discrepancies unraveled. And the most poetic justice? Every original share certificate, preserved by my father, became the foundation of a legal restoration. Half the company, by law, now belonged to his estate. To me. The Marwoods lost everything quietly, the same way they had taken it. Without spectacle. Without violence. Just truth. But the final consequence wasn't delivered by me. It was delivered by someone I did not expect. The investigation eventually uncovered Richard's role. He had been approached by Jonathan months before my father died. They believed my father would leave behind nothing, but feared he might have retained old documents. They wanted access to anything I inherited. When Richard realized the depth of their fraud, he tried to back out. They pressured him. Threatened financial ruin. Used him to access my banking information. But when he saw the picture of me in the storage corridor, an intimidation tactic he didn't approve of, he panicked. He ran. He turned himself in 2 weeks later, exhausted and remorseful. His confession dismantled the last of the Marwood defense. Lydia wept when she told me. I didn't know, she kept repeating. I swear I didn't know. I believed her. Not because I wanted to, but because the truth of her fear was too raw to fake. In the months that followed, my life changed in ways I never expected. I inherited half of a company I never sought. I appointed a management team, trusted experts, and kept a minority voting role. I didn't want power. I wanted fairness. Restoration. I moved back into my home after upgrading the security system. The black sedan never returned. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evening, the same porch where my father spent his last summer, watching birds light on the railing. And I imagine him sitting beside me, quiet, thoughtful, relieved. I didn't reclaim the company for wealth. I reclaimed it for truth. For every night his silence weighed on him. For every morning he carried that burden alone. One afternoon, as I was organizing the final legal papers, I found a handwritten letter tucked in the back of the safe's folder. My father's handwriting. Small. Precise. Maggie, if you are reading this, it means the truth has finally reached you. I stayed silent to protect you. I hid everything because I knew the moment these documents saw daylight, powerful people would try to take something from you. But I also know you. And I know that if the time came, you would fight with integrity. Not for revenge, but for justice. I am proud of you already, Dad. I read that letter 3 times before the weight of it fully settled. He hadn't hidden the truth from me because he was ashamed. He hid it because he trusted the woman I would one day become. A woman who would know the difference between retaliation and righteousness. A woman who would choose the harder path. A woman who would finish what he could not. I folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. A quiet peace settled over me. Not triumph. Not victory. Just the deep, steady warmth of closure. I tell this story not for sympathy, or admiration, or spectacle. I tell it because legacy is not the wealth we leave behind. It is the truth we preserve. My father carried a burden he believed would harm me if exposed. But silence is not always protection. Sometimes it is merely a pause before the next generation picks up the thread. Here is what I learned. The past does not stay buried simply because we stop talking about it. Stolen things do not become owned simply because time passes. And silence, no matter how gentle, does not erase wrongdoing. Justice often comes quietly. Not through dramatic confrontations or shouted accusations, but through documentation, patience, and the steady courage to keep going when fear whispers that you shouldn't. If there is a moral to my story, it is this. Revenge fueled by anger burns everything. Revenge fueled by truth rebuilds what was broken. The Marwoods lost their empire not because I fought harder than they did, but because the truth was stronger than the lies they built upon. And as for me, I gained nothing I expected, but everything I needed. Clarity. Peace. A voice I had kept too quiet for too long. And the understanding that justice, when pursued with calm resolve, can echo longer than any legacy built on deception. So if you find yourself at a crossroads, holding a truth that frightens you, unsure whether to step forward or stay silent, remember this. The truth has waited longer than you think. And it deserves to be seen.